11 toy store chains. All of them were here. All of them are gone. Some of you walked through their doors every Christmas. Some of you begged to go. Some of you pressed your nose against their windows at night, long after closing, staring at what was inside like it was the most important thing in the world. Because at 7 years old, it was. The 1980s were a particular kind of golden age for the American toy store. Not because the toys were better, though some of them were extraordinary, but because the stores themselves were places, real physical places that smelled like plastic and cardboard and possibility. Places that had weight and light and aisle after aisle of things you desperately wanted and mostly couldn't have. And then, one by one, over the years, they disappeared. Some went quietly, some collapsed under debt, some were swallowed by bigger chains that later collapsed themselves. Some were simply replaced by big box stores, by the internet, by the slow erosion of the idea that going somewhere to get a toy was an experience worth protecting. These are 11 of them. Some you'll remember the moment I say the name. Some you haven't thought about in 30 years. All of them were real. All of them mattered. And all of them are gone. Children's Palace / Child World. Before we go any further, we need to talk about a building that looked like an actual castle. Children's Palace, which operated under the parent company Child World, didn't just open a toy store, they built a destination. White brick facades, red-topped turrets on the corners, arched windows. Children walking through the front doors weren't entering a retail space, they were entering a fortress. And the fortress was full of toys. Founded in 1962 in Quincy, Massachusetts, Child World grew through the 1970s and 1980s to 182 stores nationwide, second only to Toys R Us. Their mascot was a cheerful panda named Peter Panda. Their commercials were loud and joyful. Their aisles were packed floor to ceiling with everything a child in 1985 could possibly want. Transformers on the left, G.I. Joe on the right, Barbie at the back, and a clearance section at the front that smelled faintly of old cardboard and possibility. Here's what most people don't know. Children's Palace was the store that kept things long after everyone else gave up on them. You could walk into a Children's Palace in 1988 and still find Clash of the Titans figures, still find old Masters of the Universe at clearance prices. They hoarded discontinued stock like it was treasure. For collectors and for the kids who just couldn't afford full price, that was a gift. A leveraged buyout in 1984 loaded the company with debt it could never escape. By 1992, the castle walls came down. Every location shuttered. The building sat empty for a while, square, turret-crowned ruins of a childhood landmark, before Best Buy and Staples and the ordinary needs of ordinary life moved in. Somewhere in the country right now, there's a Best Buy sitting in the exact footprint of a Children's Palace. The bones of the castle are still in the walls. Lionel Kitty City / Lionel Play World. If you grew up near Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., or Cleveland, you know this name. You might not be able to explain why it makes you feel the way it does, but you know it. Lionel, the train company. The company that had been putting toy trains under Christmas trees since 1900, that Lionel, owned one of the largest toy store chains in America. At their peak, Lionel Kitty City and Lionel Play World ran over 150 locations and briefly held the title of America's second-largest toy retailer. The jingle was unforgettable. Play World, where prices go so low, 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 low. Kids from New Jersey still say those words in their sleep. What made Lionel's stores feel different was that they carried the weight of something older. There was a legacy in the name, generations of Christmas morning trains that gave the toy aisles a particular kind of gravity. like you weren't just shopping, you were part of something that had been going on for a very long time. The chain filed for bankruptcy in 1982, clawed itself back out, grew again to 100 stores by 1991, and then collapsed for good in 1993. They tried to merge with Child World in their final days, two drowning companies reaching for each other. The merger fell through. Both went under. The Lionel name lives on in hobby stores and model train sets, but the toy stores that bore that name, the low prices and the fluorescent-lit aisles, are the kind of memory that only exists inside the people who were there. KB Toys. KB. If you grew up in a town with a mall, and most towns had a mall, your mall had a KB. It started in 1922 as a candy store in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Two brothers, the Kaufmans, selling sweets. They fell into toys by accident during World War II when a client couldn't pay his bill and handed them a wholesale toy business instead. By the 1980s, that accident had become 1,300 stores in all 50 states. KB understood something the big box stores didn't. Most of their customers weren't coming to the mall for toys. They were there for other things: shoes, clothes, lunch. And KB was going to catch them on the way past. So they lit the storefront like a beacon. Red letters, bright colors, toys stacked high in the doorway at clearance prices. Once you stopped to look, you were already inside. The stores were small, cramped even. Every inch was used. The peg hooks were packed 3 deep. The shelves were tight, but somehow that density made it feel abundant rather than cluttered, like everything in the world that was good and plastic was condensed into this one small room just for you. In 2000, a private equity firm bought the chain and loaded it with debt it could never carry. KB filed for bankruptcy in 2004, emerged smaller, filed again in 2008, and closed its last store on February 9, 2009. The Kaufman family's candy store accident, 87 years of it, ended on a cold winter Tuesday with a liquidation sale and a sign on the door. Circus World Toys. The name alone should have been enough to keep it alive forever. Circus World. Founded in Michigan in 1964 by a man named Sidney Rubin, a systems analyst who looked at demographic data showing Michigan had the 4th largest youth population in the country and decided to open a toy store, Circus World grew quietly and steadily through the 1970s into a 127-store chain across 22 states. The stores were modest, 3,500 square feet, mall-based, bright with circus-themed signage. Not as dramatic as a castle, not as famous as a giraffe, but for a specific region of the Midwest, Circus World was the toy store. It was where your parents went when they needed a birthday present and couldn't face the big box parking lot. Then it changed hands, and then again. Rite Aid bought it. Then a company called Greenman Brothers bought it and made it complicated. They tried to upgrade it, renovate it, make it more premium, and in doing so drained the capital they needed to actually stock the shelves for Christmas 1986. By 1990, Circus World was profitable again, but by then it had failed to stand out from KB Toys, which was everywhere. Greenman sold the chain to Melville Corporation, which folded it into KB. 330 locations absorbed, renamed, gone. Circus World became another store. Then that store became an empty unit. Then something else moved in. Child World, the original. Not to be confused with Children's Palace, though they eventually became the same company. The original Child World stores carried a different quality. Simpler, plainer, more workmanlike. What they had was reliability. In an era before toy superstores had conquered every city, Child World was where you went when you knew exactly what you wanted and you wanted it at a fair price.
No castle architecture, no elaborate mascot, just toys, organized and affordable in a big, clean space. When Child World acquired Children's Palace in 1975 and began incorporating the castle design into new stores, something interesting happened. They became a company with two identities: the plain, practical Child World stores and the theatrical, turret-crowned Children's Palace locations. For a while, both worked. For a while, a parent could walk into either one and know exactly what they were getting. A 1986 film called The Color of Money, Martin Scorsese directing, Tom Cruise and Paul Newman starring, used an actual Child World store as a filming location. Tom Cruise played a toy store clerk. The building still exists in Forest Park, Illinois. It's been something else for 30 years, but if you look at it from the right angle, on the right kind of gray October afternoon, you can still see what it used to be. Toys R Us. Yes, it's on this list. Toys R Us may be the most famous name here, and yes, for most of the 1980s it was thriving, not forgotten. But it belongs on this list for one reason, because it is now gone. The store that felt most permanent, most indestructible, most like a force of nature is gone, and that fact still doesn't feel entirely real. Charles Lazarus founded it in 1948 as a baby furniture store in Washington, D.C. He noticed parents kept asking about toys. He pivoted. By 1957, the first true Toys R Us was open. By the 1980s, it was everywhere, a warehouse-scale shrine to the idea that toys were serious business. The jingle was written in 1982 by a man named James Patterson. Yes, the thriller novelist, before he became famous. I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid. Thurl Ravenscroft, the man who voiced Tony the Tiger and sang You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, performed Geoffrey the Giraffe. The store was operatic in its attention to mythology. Walking into a Toys R Us in 1985 was a controlled overwhelm. The ceilings were high, the aisles were long, the signage was color-coded by category, so you always knew where you were, even when you were deliberately getting lost. For a child, it was the closest thing to an amusement park that had a parking lot and took Visa. In 2017, Toys R Us filed for bankruptcy. In 2018, the last American stores closed. The jingle fell silent. Geoffrey the Giraffe went to live at a children's hospital in New Jersey, which is quietly one of the most poignant sentences in American retail history. Zany Brainy. This one was for the kids whose parents wanted to feel good about buying toys. Zany Brainy opened in 1991, technically just outside our era, but built entirely on the 1980s educational toy movement that believed children's play could and should also be enrichment. The stores were bright and organized, the staff were trained, the selection leaned toward wooden puzzles, science kits, art supplies, books, the things that made parents feel like they were investing in a future, not just surrendering to a request. At its peak, Zany Brainy had 187 locations. It was beloved particularly by a certain kind of suburban parent, educated, earnest, convinced that the right toy at the right moment could shape a child's trajectory. Whether or not that was true, the stores were genuinely good. They carried things no one else carried. They made gift-giving feel considered rather than grabbed. Then they acquired a rival called Noodle Kid Noodle. That acquisition brought debt. The debt brought bankruptcy. By 2003, both chains were gone. 187 stores and a particular vision of what a toy store could be closed without anyone quite noticing until it was over.
Noodle Cadoodle. The name. Noodle Cadoodle. Say it out loud. It is perhaps the most perfectly named children's retail store in American history. Noodle Cadoodle operated as a smaller, more boutique version of the educational toy concept. Fewer locations than Zany Brainy, more carefully curated, with a warmth to the shopping experience that felt genuinely different from the big chains. Parents who found it tended to become loyal in the way that small store shoppers do, with a possessive affection. Our Noodle Cadoodle. When Zany Brainy acquired Noodle Cadoodle in 2000, the intention was growth. Instead, the merger accelerated the collapse of both. Within 3 years, the name that should have outlasted everything, Noodle Cadoodle, was gone. Not with a dramatic bankruptcy announcement or a flurry of news coverage, just quietly, with clearance signs in the windows and empty shelves, and the peculiar grief of watching a place that had mattered stop existing. Most people under 35 have never heard of Noodle Cadoodle. Some people over 45 still get a faraway look when you say the name. TG&Y. 900 stores. 900. TG&Y, named for founders Tomlinson, Dosselin, and Young, was a small-town variety store that in its prime was embedded in the fabric of communities across the South and Midwest the way the post office was. You didn't go to TG&Y for an experience. You went because it was there, because it had been there, because your mother went there and her mother before her. The toy section wasn't its only selling point. TG&Y sold fabric, hardware, greeting cards, housewares, the everyday necessities of small American life. But for kids in towns that didn't have a mall, didn't have a Toys R Us, didn't have anything with a proper toy aisle, TG&Y's toy section was the whole world. It was the birthday present aisle, the Christmas morning aisle, the I got a good report card aisle. Acquisitions and changing consumer preferences eroded the chain through the late 1980s. By 1990, most locations were gone. 900 stores reduced to nothing in the span of a decade. In the towns where TG&Y existed, nothing came to replace the particular function it served. The small-town variety store was a format that died, and TG&Y died with it. Playco Toys. Not every forgotten toy store was a national chain. Playco Toys operated primarily in San Diego, California. It wasn't a coast-to-coast operation. It wasn't trying to be. It was a network of smaller stores, the kind where the layout made sense, where you could see the whole space from the front door, where a parent didn't lose their child between action figures and board games. For the kids who grew up near a Playco, that intimacy was the point. The tabletops with open toys you could actually touch, the staff who knew the stock, the Transformers trading cards that Playco somehow carried when no one else did. Playco closed in the late 1990s, leaving behind a very specific kind of grief, the grief of the regional store, the one only people from your particular city remember, the kind you can't explain to someone who grew up somewhere else, the kind where you still occasionally mention the name and watch people from that era of your life light up with immediate recognition. Yes, Playco, exactly, that was ours. Lionel Toy Warehouse. We began with Lionel. We returned to Lionel for a different reason. Before Lionel consolidated its stores under the Kitty City and Playworld banners, they operated a third format, the Lionel Toy Warehouse, less theatrical than its siblings, more utilitarian. Wider aisles, higher ceilings, the warehouse aesthetic applied to a toy store before warehouse aesthetics became standard retail practice. The Toy Warehouse format was rebranded as Lionel Kitty City in 1990, erasing its own name from the map, and so it exists now as a ghost within a ghost, a store format absorbed into a chain that itself no longer exists. The Lionel Toy Warehouse never had time to become famous enough to be properly mourned. It just became something else, and then that something else became nothing. There's something particularly American about that, about the way things are renamed and rebranded and restructured until the original thing is unrecognizable and then, quietly, gone. The name disappears, the building becomes something else, and the only people who remember it are the ones who were there before the first change.